Hey everybody, it's Mr. Buro from Staten Tech, and in this video we're going to be talking about the hatch command in AutoCAD. You're going to use the hatch command every time you want to color an area in with any specific color that's in CAD, or perhaps you'd want to put a pattern in, both for decorative purposes and also for traditional purposes in architecture and engineering to specify a material. It's kind of an old-fashioned thing that was done even back when people were drawing on paper regarding architecture and engineering. But you can color things in, use the patterns, and also you can use a gradient, which is kind of a blending of two different colors. But just to be upfront with everything, I do want to say that the hatch command traditionally is the most problematic command inside AutoCAD, and you will likely experience issues with crashing the program or getting the file corrupted or a number of different things. So for that purpose, I would recommend you save the file often while you're working with hatches, just to make sure that you still have a safe and reliable copy of the file somewhere. And I also believe that you should always put your hatches on a separate layer if you're going to be working with a file that should be something that's important to you. Okay, so hatches on a separate layer and saving the file often. Okay, so the hatch command can be found on the home ribbon right over here. It also has a shortcut of H for hatch. Upon selecting the command, it asks you to pick an internal point. This is the default option for choosing where to apply a hatch. So if I click over here or just hover my mouse in this bounded area, you'll see that this pattern kind of fills it. And this is the ANSI 31 pattern. So if I click over here, then I have selected that I do want my hatch to be there. And then if I hit close hatch creation, it's there, and it is a selectable object, and it has an apparent center over here, which can be selected to move the object. And as you can see, it does not harm its original border, which is a nice thing to know. So let's get back to doing that again. I'm going to fill this in one more time, and I'm going to show you the basics first, which is if you click solid over here or in the drop down over here, you'll see that it does fill in with a solid color, and that color can be changed on the fly as you're working with it. Even after you close the hatch and then click it, you'll see that the context sensitive menu pops up again, and you can go ahead and change its color, or you can go ahead and change it back to a pattern if you want. So the properties of a hatch continue to be editable for as long as the hatch does exist, which is a nice thing. Regarding the patterns, if you hit the drop-down box over here, you'll see several patterns in which you can preview them by just kind of hovering your mouse over. This is a brick pattern, another brick pattern over here. This one has kind of like the grout with a little bit of space in between, and this one does not. You'll see like an angled pattern over here, a tiled crisscross pattern here, more brick patterns. This one is a material pattern that specifies concrete. As you could say, they're kind of like all too big. So if I click on this brick pattern first, and then I'm going to go over here to the scale area, I can go ahead and type a scale in, or I can hit this button over here to move the scale downward in increments. But I'm going to type 0.1, and as you can see with a scale of 0.1, it looks like it's more appropriate at this time, and I can switch it to that brick pattern like I was saying before. This one looks like solid after I highlight it, so now that was not appropriate scale for this. So if I click this one and go back to 1, and then you can see the pattern does show up again. So you got to be really careful with these patterns, because they all do have different scales that are appropriate. And again, that's based on their traditional usage. Here's the concrete pattern. As you can see, that's probably appropriate for the concrete pattern. There's some other ones here with tiling, brick, one that represents earth over here, glass of different types. Now we're going to go into like the gradient ones there as an option. There's some hexagonal patterns or honeycomb pattern. There's one for gravel over here. These seem to have a much I guess sparse or less dense scale to them. I'll switch the scale back to 1, and you can see that that does pop up in a really cool way. Okay, so with the patterns, you can also do coloring as well, coloring the pattern itself, and then the patterns also have a background color if you want to work with that, as you can see. Okay, so that's a pretty cool thing that's always there as an option. Again, switching the patterns in the drop-down box is really how you want to go about it from the beginning, and select what you want, because the solid option is here, as well as the gradients on the bottom and things like that. Other options that you see are the angle at which the hatch is moving. So I could set this angle, which is obviously appropriate for this particular thing. You could see that those lines move on the fly to preview what's there, which is a great thing to see. But once you move that angle, like if I have that for the brick pattern, that doesn't really make any sense. So you want to make sure your angle is appropriate for the pattern that you pick. Angles do not affect the solids, of course. You could change the hatch to be transparent or semi-transparent, which is a really cool option to have. Associative means that it does update as the boundary remains updated, which is a really good thing. So I just unchecked that. So now if I were to pull on the original boundary, you can see that the hatch does not update. But if I delete this hatch and replace it, and I leave associative checked, then when I do close the hatch and I click on that boundary, you can see that it does actually change what gets filled in by the hatch, which is a really cool option. Okay, let's get back to doing that one more time. I'm going to go with the solid here, and I will be showing you also what happens if you hatch multiple items. So again, let me close this and move it to the side. This is just a hatch over there. Then let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pattern hatch two things at the same time. So let's say I pick the ANSI pattern over here and over here. I'm going to blow up that scale a little bit so you can see the lines. Something that's a little bit interesting when you hatch something at the same time, you'll see that the pattern actually is continuous with these items. Meaning, like if I were to bring this border real close, you could see that those lines actually match up with each other, which is a really cool thing to have. And that does happen when you use patterns often. But because I hatch these both at the same time, they actually are the same objects. And then for that reason, if I change the properties of one, then the property of the other one changes as well. I don't recommend doing that very often unless you're really sure that they're going to be a singular object. Otherwise, you probably just want to stick to what you were doing before. There's some other options too, and I'll bring those to your attention right now. I'm going to hatch this one area one more time with a pattern. And now I'm going to hit this tiny arrow over here, which is a little deceiving because of how powerful it is, but how difficult it is to see on the menu. When you click it, you'll get this box pop up. This is the hatch and gradient option menu. Most of these options right here are also present on the context sensitive menu that pops up on the top. However, it's a little bit easier to see them organized this way for sure. And then on top of this particular menu being very, very hidden over here in that little arrow, you can see that if I press this button right here, it actually opens up another set of options. And these we're going to be talking about in a little bit, especially this island detection one. That is a difficult one to understand. Before I get into the details of island detection, I want to show you that when you have boundaries for hatching, it's not always pick points. Sometimes you can do it with select objects, and it really does come into play quite a bit. So I'm going to delete this one more time, and I'm going to show you again that if I pick the hatch button, and then instead of doing pick points as my default, I'm going to hit select objects. Now when I hit select objects, there's nothing to select inside the shape, but I can select the border of the shape, and then AutoCAD will detect which ones I want to be filled in that way. So that's a really cool thing. where you could have the option to not just pick a point within, but to select an object as well. If your object is a closed figure, then selecting it is probably always going to be the safest thing to do. When you have, let's say, thousands of CAD objects in your drawing and you're doing the pick points, every time you do a pick points, AutoCAD has to look inside your drawing to find bounded areas. And if it can't find the bounded areas so quickly, then you're going to realize very, very fast that it's likely the file is going to be corrupted and crash your computer, because when AutoCAD has to work very, very heavily to find mathematically your bounded areas and what your intention is for the hatch, it becomes very difficult. Okay, let's move on to this figure right here. I purposely made this figure using a polyline and then the offset command to make interior pieces to it. I'm going to hatch this one again with a pattern. This time I'll use pick points. Doesn't appear to have a problem. Let me fill it in now. I'm going to make it blue. And then before I finish this selection, I'm going to bring up those options again. And I'm going to select for island detection the normal option. Now remember, when I clicked this figure, I clicked this point right here as an internal point. It was within these two boundary lines. But AutoCAD has this island detection option, which if you set it on to normal, you'll see that the hatch itself found that this item here and this item here and this item here are considered islands within the bounded area, and those islands alternate whether or not they're filled in for the hatch pattern. It's a really, it's actually a convenient option to have, but also one that you're not really always sure how it's going to work. If I pick ignore as my boundary option, then you'll see that the entire thing fills in. So it only uses the outer polyline as a boundary, while the rest within don't function as a boundary any longer. Just like anything else before with hatches, you can modify these options on the fly. If I go ahead and do something over here where it's not as simple, this is a very simple bounded area where it's the boundaries do not cross each other, but here these circles have several crossing boundaries. And if I were to hatch, let's say within this area, you can see that this is detected as an island, but AutoCAD does not really know what you intend to happen with the rest of it. So it does get a little strange, and I can continue to fill these in if I want to on the same hatch command, and luckily it didn't give me a problem. Let's get a little bit more complex now. I drew this strange crescent shape. One of them was an arc, and I think this was another arc with two lines joining them. Okay, I drew this on purpose to be very, very large. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how CAD is going to fail hatching this thing. I'm going to zoom in to about this far, and then I'll click the hatch command. And when I click in it, it says a closed boundary cannot be determined. So that's kind of what I expected before. I know the boundary's closed, but CAD actually uses what's on the screen in the visible area to do most of its calculations. So you're really pushing it very, very hard to find out that you actually just want to hatch this area in general here, and you can see those little red circles pop up. Those are the hatch warnings. But if I zoom it out a little bit where the entire area is on the screen, I can easily use the hatch command to find that particular area, close it up, and there it is. And you can edit this as much as you like and do all kinds of stuff to it. Really wasn't that difficult for CAD to do. So again, you want to hatch something like this as large as you can with the entire bounded areas on the screen. Even if I wanted to hatch something here, for instance, this is a single polyline with a whole bunch of crossed areas and rounded areas too. Watch what happens. This is going to be very quick for you to see, but I'm going to zoom out on this object. And this is very ridiculous. You should never hatch in this way. But if I want to hatch one little area, I want you to take notice about what that area looks like when I zoom in on it quickly. So I'm going to click, and then I'm going to zoom in real fast. Oops, let's get that as a solid. Watch again. Okay. See how it appears jagged for a second there, and then it just disappears, because CAD is now getting confused as what it wants me to do. When I have it on the screen, it takes a little bit of a delay for it to pop up. This one's not working at all. That one popped in, this one popped in, this one not so much. So as you can see, CAD is definitely getting confused as to what it wants for my bounded areas, and then it has this like really jagged look to it, but then when I allow it to fill in from the correct zoom level, it does find exactly what you want to be hatched. That's a really cool feature to have. Sometimes AutoCAD would fail completely and not allow you to do a hatch like that. Same thing over here. This one, probably because of how complex it is, this is one continuous space, but it's made of so many different objects, it's gonna fail quite a bit. So what I did prior to starting this video is I created this layer called help. And I want to show you how to use this help layer. I'm going to set it to be the active layer, and then I'm going to use polylines. So let's say for this area, if this area in particular was giving me a hard time, what I would do is I would draw a polyline over the area. This one's going to be tough. And then I'll hit C to close it. So this is a closed polyline. I got some issues over here, but I purposely did it where I can click onto here and make it an arc. Snap it on, as you can see. Get a little bit tighter in there. And then this one I'll create into an arc as well. Snap that on. So it fits real clean on there now. And I have that yellow line overlapping everything. So now when I want to hatch this, I can definitely hatch it the right way, except I'm not going to hatch on my help layer. I'm going to hatch on my layer 0 or a hatch layer that you set up prior to this. Then I'll do my blue hatch, but not with the pick points. I'm going to just hit select objects. And I know that if I select that polyline, it's going to fill in perfectly. The only problem is it has that yellow border that's popping up, which is kind of hard to see here. But I'll show you that it pops up right here. So the borders are now popping up. And if I don't want it to appear, I will definitely just turn it off. So I've turned off that yellow layer, and now it cannot be visible at all. It's kind of was hard to see anyway. But for this thing in particular, I'm not even going to attempt to hatch this in that old way where I'm just going to pick a point, because I know this is going to fail. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that help layer, turn it on again, and then make it active. And with my polylines, this is going to seem weird, but I'm actually going to draw a whole bunch of borders in between here. This is going to take me a minute, but you'll see. Pick borders that make sense for CAD to see. The polylines themselves make things much easier for CAD to understand, because polylines, if you snap them the right way to endpoints, it's actually very simple for CAD to understand what's a closed area and what's not so closed. So these look good up here. I'm going to go down, put one over here. Oops. Don't want to go over line segments. That would be very, very problematic. This one I'll just cross in between, over here, here. This one I'll break over here as well, because I know that curve is going to be a little complex. Maybe I'll even break it one more time over here. Good. A few more, and be fine. This one didn't attach, so I'm going to just fix it. And one more here. You know, it looks like it takes a little bit of time, but it's really not that bad. Okay, so now that I have all these areas broken, I'm gonna zoom up on those areas, go back to layer 0, I'll do my hatching, and I'll use pick points again, and I will just fill them in one by one. Won't take me long. And I'm doing these all in one hatch command. So this is actually going to be a continuous piece when I'm done. And right now, you might be thinking that those hatch borders, okay, this one's giving me a little bit of a hard time. Let's see what happens. Those hatch borders actually are possibly going to be problematic to us, but we'll see if it does end up that way. As you can see, that one did come out nice. So it's working. This one might be problematic. Nope, came out good. And there. So I have the whole figure hatched. Now I'm going to press enter to accept it. And as you can see, the yellow borders are all present, but not after I turn them off. Once I turn the visibility of the help layer off, you can see that now I have this one continuous piece. And because I did it in all one hatch command, you can see actually it is one hatch piece. So those are different techniques for avoiding problems with the hatch command. You create your help layer, make it a color that you can see it easily pops up, and you could do it to break up areas in which you can do the pick points again, which is what I did here. It's like when you click within a bounded area, or just to remind you, like I did over here before, this particular one I had the yellow border that I created with the polyline, and this yellow border was one continuous piece that fit perfectly with these two arc segments within that area. And that was really easy to do, just using some clever endpoint selections and also turning a few segments into arcs and noting where the concavity of those arcs changed, so I can put an extra vertex right here to fit within this particular curved area. I can move that back into place just to show you again how cleanly it fits over everything. And that really shows me that everything worked the right way. So that's about it. That's the hatch command. Again, you're going to be running into problems with it. It's definitely going to be frustrating, but please try to stick to those techniques where you're going to zoom in to have the entire hatch area visible on the screen when you do the hatch with pick points. And don't necessarily be hatching things from this far zoomed out, or like if I was hatching this particular thing, I'm not going to zoom in all the way where I can't even see a border, or I only see a little bit of the border. I want to have the whole thing on the screen. Play around with those options. They're really, really nice. You could even like throw the gradient in, and the gradient has a couple of different things where you could do all kinds of different patterns, like radial patterns and stuff like that. It's a nice option to have, although it's not used as often. And those gradient patterns also bleed in between figures, as you can see. If I turn this into a gradient and then click here, as you can see, the gradient pattern is bleeding in between the areas. But if I didn't want it to do that, then I could just throw a gradient here, press enter, and I can throw another gradient here. And as you can see, that didn't bleed because those are two separate hatches, but this was one continuous hatch. So you can have that real customized look to anything that you want, and it really has a great effect. This is exactly how you would color something in AutoCAD in 2D. Not necessarily 3D. For 3D, you use materials, but for 2D, this is how it works. So again, that's about it. I wish you good luck with the hatch command because you're going to need it. Thank you very much.